Bad Blood: Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup by John Carreyrou. This is an excellent book, and it documents the rise and fall of Theranos, the Silicon Valley unicorn that claimed to run many blood tests on just a small fingerprick of blood. Theranos provides a stark reminder of why healthcare startups need to be done properly, why transparency and external validation is required. It illustrates how easy it is to convince a room of non-medical personnel to invest and support medical claims that sound good. I even believed the hype of Theranos for many years. On camera, Elizabeth Holmes seemed truthful and honest, and unfortunately, most of what she said was an outright lie. And this supports Paul Graham's observations with regards to startups, that it's very difficult for trustworthy people to identify other trustworthy people. And this is different from other smart people being able to identify other smart people. In part, I believe the Theranos case was because of the fact that they were associated with Walgreens. I assumed that Walgreens had done their due diligence if they were rolling out Theranos in their stores. But in the end, nobody had. I'd actually gone to one of the Walgreens in Palo Alto to try to get my blood work done there, but found out you had to have a state of California physician lab requisition to have it done at the time, so I couldn't. Let's first look at the problems that have ensued since the book has finished. Holmes claimed to have developed a revolutionary new technology after dropping out of Stanford at age 19. She went on to found Theranos in 2003 and invented the Edison machine. Now, the problem with the machine was it never worked, and multiple tricks were used during demos to investors to give the impression that the machine actually was working properly. It was unreliable, and they would have to use fake error messages, fake lab results, and secretly remove samples from the machine to go run them on stock lab equipment. But even their stock lab equipment was not very good. They tampered and hacked with the machine, specifically changing that dilution process, and the lab's quality control was essentially non-existent. When the company tried to do its own quality testing or reporting on and analytics, they would discard any outliers. And so essentially they had a garbage product and ran garbage validation tests on it. This is why Theranos was able to achieve the dual achievements. It both for several months was the largest company in Silicon Valley with a market cap of $9 billion, and it also then became the largest security fraud in history. In 2014, they claimed to have an anticipated $100 million of revenue, but they only actually had 100,000. And in the end, approximately $1 billion worth of investor capital was lost in the fraud. Elizabeth Holmes and her former boyfriend, Sonny, were charged in March 2018 with civil fraud by the Securities and Exchange Commission. In June 2018, they were indicted on federal wire fraud charges. Interestingly, it's called wire fraud because the mail and wire fraud charges were legal since 1872. And just last week, in September 2018, the company announced that it is dissolving. It's voided the last 2 years' worth of all their blood work, millions of tests, due to the inaccuracy of the results. If you go in to summarize the actual book itself, written by Wall Street Journal's John Carreyrou, it's an easy book to summarize. In simple, don't lie, don't lie, don't lie. All the problems from the Theranos story stem from the fact that its founder kept peddling false tales. John Carreyrou had been asked in several interviews whether he thinks that Holmes intended to defraud investors from the start, and he suspects not. But over time, the gap between what she claimed her technology could do and what the technology actually could deliver continued to widen. And as this gap widened, it unfortunately did not stop Elizabeth Holmes from putting the tools, which were not ready yet, into production with patient use. There's lots of good summaries of the book online. You can listen to it on Audible. It's a great listen. You could also watch John's interview on This Week in Startups with Jason Calacanis, who's actually been a huge Theranos fraud story proponent ever since the story first came out in the 2015 Wall Street Journal. John Kerry also had a really good interview with the Commonwealth Club in 2018. If you want to bypass the book, you can wait for the movie to be released. Jennifer Lawrence will be starring as Elizabeth Holmes, and it should be an amazing film because Adam McKay, who directed The Big Short, is also directing this film. Unfortunately, it's hard to find the actual Wall Street Journal original articles from 2015 because the journal has a stupid paywall, which is ridiculous. Because there's so many websites which summarize the Theranos story, I just wanted to bring a few random facts that I found interesting that weren't documented everywhere else. I didn't realize that Elizabeth Holmes was dating Sunny Balwandi, and he was a man 19 years her senior. She appointed him to many of the highest positions in the company, and it seemed that it was done with the board not knowing that they actually were in a relationship. The book describes Sunny as the type of human that you'd probably never want to spend time with. He would arrive in the office in his Lamborghini. His top 3 buttons shirts always happened to be undone, and he would reek of cologne. He would spend his day essentially shouting at and firing employees. He seemed to have no qualifications to hold the executive positions he had at the company, and it seems like Holmes was a serial liar. Another fact, the famous advertising firm Chiat Day was actually hired on retainer for $6 million per year to do the work for Theranos. And so their iconic website and the photography campaign, which many of us are familiar with when we think of Theranos, was produced by them. And Elizabeth hired them in part because they worked with Apple on their important campaigns. The Edison machine's case was constructed by the famous industrial designer Yves Behar. The company had very high turnover, and particularly of the board and the management staff, and this is always a red flag. Theranos moved into more expensive office space in Palo Alto, and this convinced both the employees and the outsiders that the company was actually doing well given the pricey real estate. So this is a good trick if you ever have a failing or a questionable company. Just spend more money on real estate and people will think you're doing well. It seems that the fear of missing out actually was a major driving force in the partnership between Walgreens and Theranos. Even when it became apparent to Walgreens that the Theranos project may not succeed, their concern was that if Theranos did eventually deliver what they claim, that if they dropped working with the company too soon, their competitor, CVS, could come in and cut a deal with Theranos, and this would put Walgreens at a significant disadvantage. The same fear of missing out also applied to Safeway. The former Safeway CEO, Steve Bird, became enamored by Holmes. He brought her a gift to her office of a toy private jet, telling her that the next one will be real. Bird failed to give Theranos sufficient due diligence as he would in other aspects of his operations with the other groups he's worked with in Safeway, and he ended up spending $350 million in Project T-Rex to renovate 800 Safeway stores for anticipated Theranos lab space. In the end, the Safeway board sent Bird into an early retirement for his mishandling of Theranos. I hadn't come across the term vaporware previously, and it's the term used in technology when software and products are demoed, but in fact, they don't fully function or fully exist. And most major companies like IBM or Microsoft or Apple, think of those first iPhone demos, have engaged in this. The problem is that in general, vaporware is harmless. It only disappoints customers in that they never actually receive the products that they saw previously on stage. The problem is that when vaporware is applied to medical devices, the demo actually isn't real. And this is kind of fraudulent in the space of healthcare. And then it becomes doubly bad when the vaporware device actually goes into production on patient use. And the last random fact was that the Theranos story underscores the importance of independent third-party assessments in medical technology. In addition, the ability to review these assessments firsthand is crucial. Everyone in the Theranos story thought that someone else had looked into the validity of the product, but in the end, no one had. And so, to conclude, is there anything good that came out of the Theranos story? I think there is. And in particular, Theranos worked in Arizona to pass legislation that would allow patients to order blood requisitions without having to have a physician sign off on them. This passed in 2015 as House Bill 2645, and at the time I remember being quite excited about this and doing a fair bit of research. I think this is a good step forward in being able to break the medical cartel and eventually will lead to improved patient care. But this is just the first step of a long journey. Going forward, the question which is at the front of my mind is whistleblowers and how difficult it is to be a whistleblower. Tyler Schultz, who was one of the key whistleblowers in the Theranos story, ended up having $500,000 of legal expenses that his parents had to pay. In an age where companies engage routinely in hyper-aggressive non-disclosure contracts, and the enforcement of these contracts can potentially quash any complaints about a company before they can be fully investigated, and before legal activity can be elucidated. My next book I want to read in this area is Whistleblowers, Broken Lives, and Organizational Power. It's been on my bookshelf since the Glenn Greenwald book on Edward Snowden came out in 2015. And I think this is an important concept to understand more of, which I look forward to investigating.